The sun was setting behind the mountains of eastern Afghanistan when Sergeant Maya Collins received the mission briefing that would change her life forever. She sat in the dusty operations room at Forward Operating Base Thunder, her rifle resting against the wall beside her. The commanding officer spread a map across the table and pointed to a small village nestled between two rocky ridges. Intelligence confirms a high-value target is meeting with local insurgent leaders tomorrow evening, Captain Rodriguez said, his voice low and serious. We need eyes on that compound, and we need the best shooter we have. Every soldier in the room knew who that was. Maya had earned her reputation through 3 deployments and over 40 confirmed kills. She was the only female sniper in the entire task force, and she had proven herself time and again in the most dangerous situations imaginable. Maya studied the map carefully. The village was remote, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through narrow mountain passes. The compound sat at the center of the village, surrounded by mud brick walls and overlooked by a crumbling watchtower. Getting into position would require a 12-mile hike through hostile territory under the cover of darkness. I'll need a spotter, Maya said, tracing her finger along a ridge that offered a clear line of sight to the compound. Someone who can keep up and stay quiet. Captain Rodriguez nodded. Corporal James Henderson. He's young, but he's got steady hands and good eyes. You leave at 0200 hours. Maya spent the next several hours preparing her equipment. She cleaned her rifle with the same careful attention she had learned from her father, a retired Marine who had taught her to shoot when she was just 8 years old. Growing up on a ranch in rural Montana, Maya had learned patience and precision long before she ever thought about joining the military. Her father had been skeptical when she announced her intention to enlist, not because he doubted her abilities, but because he knew the challenges she would face as a woman in a combat role. The military had only recently opened sniper training to female soldiers, and Maya was among the first to qualify. She had endured the whispers, the doubts, and the open hostility of men who believed she did not belong. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the mission. Corporal Henderson arrived at the armory just before midnight, carrying his own pack of equipment. He was 23 years old, with a round face and nervous energy that made him seem even younger. This would be his first long-range reconnaissance mission, and Maya could see the mixture of excitement and fear in his eyes. "You ready for this?" she asked, checking the scope on her rifle one final time. Henderson nodded quickly. "Yes, Sergeant. I won't let you down." Maya studied him for a moment. She had seen that same eager expression on dozens of young soldiers over the years. Some of them had lived up to their promises. Others had frozen under fire or made mistakes that cost lives. She hoped Henderson would prove himself worthy of the trust being placed in him. They departed the base at exactly 0200 hours, slipping through the wire perimeter and into the darkness beyond. The night was cold and clear, the stars spreading across the sky like scattered diamonds. Maya moved with practiced silence, her boots finding solid ground even on the treacherous mountain trails. Henderson struggled to keep pace at first, his breathing heavy and his footsteps too loud. Maya paused several times to let him catch up, using the moments to scan the surrounding terrain through her night vision goggles. The enemy had patrols in these mountains, and one wrong step could alert them to the presence of American soldiers. They covered the first 6 miles without incident, stopping briefly to drink water and check their position on the GPS. The village was still several hours ahead, hidden behind a series of rocky outcroppings that rose from the valley floor like ancient sentinels. "How do you stay so calm?" Henderson whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. Maya considered the question. She had been asked it many times before, usually by soldiers who could not understand how she maintained her composure in the most stressful situations. The truth was complicated. Fear never truly went away. She had simply learned to control it, to channel it into focus and precision. Practice, she finally answered. And understanding that fear is just information. It tells you to pay attention, to be careful, but it doesn't get to make decisions for you. Henderson seemed to consider this as they resumed their hike. The terrain grew steeper as they climbed toward the ridge that would serve as their observation post. Maya's legs burned with the effort, but she pushed through the discomfort. There would be time to rest once they were in position. Dawn was still 2 hours away when they reached the designated spot. The ridge offered an excellent view of the village below, with clear sight lines to the compound where the meeting was supposed to take place. Maya quickly set up her rifle on a flat rock, adjusting the bipod and checking the range through her scope. The compound was approximately 800 meters away, well within the effective range of her weapon. She could see the watchtower clearly, along with the main building where the insurgent leaders would gather. Several armed men patrolled the perimeter, their movements lazy and predictable. They did not expect danger to come from the mountains. Henderson positioned himself beside her, pulling out his spotting scope and rangefinder. His hands were steadier now, his breathing more controlled. The hike had burned off some of his nervous energy, leaving behind the focused soldier Maya needed him to be. "I count 12 hostiles," Henderson reported, scanning the compound systematically. "Most of them are carrying AK-47s. 2 have RPGs. Maya made mental notes of each position, calculating angles and distances. If the mission went according to plan, she would only need to take 1 shot. But she had learned long ago that missions rarely went according to plan, and she prepared herself for every possible scenario. The hours passed slowly as they waited for the target to arrive. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows across the valley. Maya remained perfectly still, her eye never leaving the scope. Patience was the most important skill a sniper could possess, and she had cultivated it through years of practice. Henderson maintained his surveillance, calling out updates whenever the patrol patterns changed or new vehicles arrived at the compound. By midday, the temperature had climbed significantly, and sweat dripped down Maya's face despite the cooling breeze. She ignored the discomfort, focusing entirely on the mission. "Vehicle approaching from the north," Henderson said suddenly, his voice tight with excitement. "Black SUV, heavily armored. This could be our guy." Maya tracked the vehicle as it wound through the narrow streets of the village and stopped in front of the compound. Several armed men emerged first, scanning the area for threats before opening the rear door. A tall man in traditional robes stepped out, his face partially obscured by a thick beard. "Confirming identity," Henderson said, comparing the man's features to the photograph they had been given. "That's him. That's Abdul Rashid." Maya's finger rested lightly on the trigger. Abdul Rashid was responsible for dozens of attacks on American forces, including a roadside bomb that had killed 6 soldiers from Maya's unit the previous year. She had known some of those men personally, had eaten meals with them, and laughed at their jokes. Taking this shot would not bring them back, but it might prevent others from suffering the same fate. She waited as Rashid entered the compound, disappearing behind the mud brick walls. The meeting would take place inside the main building, but eventually he would have to come out. When he did, Maya would be ready. The afternoon stretched into evening, and still they waited. Henderson grew restless, shifting position every few minutes despite Maya's warnings to remain still. She understood his impatience. The ground was hard, their muscles were cramped, and the tension was almost unbearable. But discipline was what separated professionals from amateurs. "Movement at the main entrance," Henderson reported as the sun began to set. "Multiple individuals exiting the building." Maya watched through her scope as a group of men emerged from the compound. Rashid was among them, walking beside another man who appeared to be a local tribal leader. They stopped in the courtyard, engaged in animated conversation, their bodyguards forming a protective circle around them. "I have the shot," Maya said, her voice perfectly steady. "Requesting authorization to engage." The radio crackled briefly before Captain Rodriguez's voice came through. "You are cleared to engage. Take the shot." Maya exhaled slowly, her crosshairs centered on Rashid's chest. At this distance, with the current wind conditions, she would need to adjust her aim slightly to the left. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and in that moment, everything else fell away. There was only the target and the bullet that would end his life. But before she could fire, the world exploded around her. The first bullet struck the rock inches from her head, sending fragments of stone flying in all directions. Maya threw herself sideways as more rounds tore through the air, the distinctive crack of rifles echoing across the valley. They had been spotted. "Contact!" Henderson shouted, scrambling for cover behind a nearby boulder. "Multiple shooters! South side of the ridge!" Maya rolled into a shallow depression in the ground, her heart pounding as bullets kicked up dust all around her. She had been in firefights before, but never while completely exposed on an enemy-controlled ridge. There was no air support available, no quick reaction force that could reach them in time. They were alone, surrounded, and under heavy fire. She raised her rifle and scanned for targets. Through her scope, she spotted muzzle flashes coming from at least 3 different positions on the opposite hillside. The enemy had set up an ambush, probably tipped off by a sympathizer in the village. They had walked into a trap. "How many?" she called to Henderson, who was trying to return fire with his carbine. "At least 10, maybe more. They're trying to flank us on the left." Maya shifted her position, ignoring the bullets that snapped past her head. She found the first enemy fighter in her scope, a bearded man crouched behind a rock formation, his rifle aimed in their direction. She squeezed the trigger, and the man dropped instantly. But taking out one shooter did nothing to change their situation. More enemies were moving up the hillside, using the rocky terrain for cover. In a matter of minutes, they would be surrounded. Maya knew that once that happened, their chances of survival would drop to nearly 0. "We need to move!" she shouted, already calculating their options. The ridge behind them led to a narrow canyon that might offer an escape route. It was their only chance. Henderson fired a burst at the advancing enemy, then turned to follow Maya as she began crawling toward the rear of their position. The fire intensified. The enemy sensing their attempt to withdraw, bullets ricocheted off the rocks, filling the air with deadly fragments. They had covered perhaps 50 meters when Henderson cried out in pain. Maya turned to see him clutching his leg, blood seeping through his fingers. He had been hit. Without hesitation, Maya scrambled back to his position, keeping her head low as the enemy continued to pour fire in their direction. Henderson's face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. The bullet had struck his thigh, missing the femoral artery by inches. He would live, but he could not walk. "Leave me," Henderson gasped, trying to push her away. "Get out while you can." Maya ignored him. She grabbed his pack strap and began dragging him toward the canyon, using every ounce of strength she possessed. The weight was immense, and her progress was painfully slow, but she refused to abandon the young soldier who had trusted her. The enemy fire slackened momentarily as the fighters repositioned themselves for the final assault. Maya used the brief respite to pull Henderson into a small rocky alcove that offered partial cover from the surrounding hills. It was not much, but it was something. She quickly applied a tourniquet to Henderson's leg, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around them. The bleeding slowed, and Henderson's breathing steadied slightly. He was still in danger, but he was not going to bleed out in the next few minutes. "How many rounds do you have left?" she asked, checking her own ammunition. Henderson fumbled with his magazine pouch. 2 mags, maybe 60 rounds. Maya had less than that. Her rifle held 5 rounds, and she had only 3 additional magazines in her vest. Against a force of unknown size, it was not nearly enough. But surrender was not an option. She had seen what the enemy did to captured soldiers, especially women. The sun had set completely now, and darkness was settling over the mountains. In some ways, this worked to their advantage. The enemy would have difficulty seeing them in the shadows of the alcove, but it also meant that help was far away, and the cold night would drain their strength if the bullets did not find them first. Maya positioned herself at the entrance of the alcove, her rifle aimed at the most likely avenue of approach. Behind her, Henderson had managed to prop himself up against the rock wall, his own weapon ready despite the pain that twisted his features. The enemy was coming. She could hear them moving through the darkness, their boots scraping against the rocky ground. They were being cautious now, wary of the American sniper who had already killed one of their number. But caution would only slow them down, not stop them. The first figure appeared at the edge of her vision, a shadow moving against the slightly lighter background of the sky. Maya tracked him with her scope, waiting until he stepped into the open. Her rifle barked once and the figure collapsed. Immediately, the night erupted with gunfire. Bullets slammed into the rocks around the alcove, showering Maya with debris. She pressed herself flat against the ground, making herself as small a target as possible while returning fire at every muzzle flash she could see. The battle had begun, and it would be a long night. The darkness became Maya's closest ally and her greatest enemy. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could signal an approaching fighter. She strained her eyes through the night vision scope, searching for movement among the rocks while conserving her precious ammunition. The first hour of the firefight had been the most intense. The enemy had launched 3 separate assaults on their position, each time pushing closer before Maya's accurate fire drove them back. She had killed 4 more fighters during those attacks, but she knew her luck would not hold forever. Eventually, the ammunition would run out, or a lucky bullet would find its mark. Henderson had fought bravely despite his wound. He could not move from his position against the rock wall, but he had provided covering fire with his carbine, spraying bullets at the enemy whenever they attempted to advance. His face was ghostly white in the darkness, and Maya could see the strain in his features. The pain must have been excruciating, but he refused to show weakness. "They're pulling back," Henderson whispered as the gunfire faded to scattered shots. "Maybe they're giving up." Maya shook her head. She had seen this tactic before. The enemy would withdraw temporarily, allowing their targets to relax and lower their guard. Then they would strike again, harder and faster than before. It was a game of patience, and the insurgents had all night to play. "They're regrouping," she replied, her voice barely audible. Probably waiting for reinforcements. The thought was terrifying. They were already outnumbered, and every fighter the enemy brought into the battle decreased their chances of survival. Maya tried to raise headquarters on the radio, but the mountains blocked the signal. They were completely cut off from help. She used the lull in fighting to check their supplies. Henderson had 2 full magazines remaining, plus a handful of loose rounds in his pocket. Maya had 3 magazines for her sniper rifle and 2 for her sidearm. It was enough to hold out for perhaps another hour of heavy fighting. After that, they would be defenseless. "Why did you come back for me?" Henderson asked suddenly, his voice rough with pain. "You could have made it to the canyon. You could have escaped." Maya considered the question. In truth, leaving him behind had never entered her mind. The decision to drag him to safety had been automatic, driven by something deeper than training or duty. "We don't leave people behind," she finally said. "That's not who we are." Henderson was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, filled with determination. "Then we're getting out of here together. Both of us." Maya allowed herself a small smile. The young corporal had courage. Whatever happened tonight, He had proven himself worthy of the trust she had placed in him. The enemy returned just before midnight, their approach announced by the clatter of loose rocks beneath their boots. Maya counted at least 15 muzzle flashes as they opened fire, more than twice the number she had estimated earlier. Reinforcements had arrived. She fired methodically, each shot carefully aimed to maximize the impact of her dwindling ammunition. 3 more fighters fell before the others reached cover, but the remaining 12 continued to advance from multiple directions. They were trying to surround the alcove to eliminate any chance of escape. A grenade landed 10 meters from their position, its explosion throwing dirt and debris into the air. Maya felt the concussion in her chest, her ears ringing from the blast. Before she could recover, another grenade detonated, this one closer still. "They're going to rush us!" Henderson shouted, firing his carbine in short, controlled bursts. Maya knew he was right. The grenades were softening their position, preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm their defenses. She had perhaps 2 magazines left, not enough to stop a determined charge from multiple directions. In that moment, she thought about her father. He had taught her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important than fear. Right now, that something was Henderson, the young soldier who depended on her for survival. She made a decision that surprised even herself. Rather than waiting for the enemy to attack, she would take the fight to them. "Cover me," she told Henderson, handing him her spare magazines. "I'm going to flank them on the left." Henderson's eyes widened. "That's suicide! There's too many of them!" "If I stay here, we both die," Maya replied, checking her sidearm. "If I can take out their leadership, the others might scatter. It's our only chance." Before Henderson could argue further, Maya slipped out of the alcove and into the darkness. She moved with the silent grace of a predator, her body low to the ground as she crept along the rocky ridge. The enemy was focused on the alcove, their attention fixed on Henderson's position. They did not expect the American sniper to come to them. She found the first enemy fighter crouched behind a boulder, his rifle aimed at the alcove. Maya approached from behind, moving so quietly that the man never heard her coming. Her knife found his throat before he could cry out, and he slumped to the ground without making a sound. 2 more fighters died in similar fashion as Maya worked her way around the enemy flank. She was becoming something primal, something dangerous, driven by the desperate need to survive and protect her teammate. Every kill brought her closer to the enemy commander, the man whose orders had led to this ambush. She found him near the center of the enemy formation, surrounded by a cluster of bodyguards. He was speaking into a radio, probably calling for even more reinforcements. If she could eliminate him, the others might lose the coordination needed to continue the assault. Maya raised her rifle and sighted through the scope. The commander was barely visible in the darkness, his features obscured by shadows. She would have 1 shot, maybe 2, before his bodyguards reacted. It had to count. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the commander dropped instantly. His bodyguards spun in confusion, trying to locate the source of the shot. Maya fired again, dropping another man before rolling behind a rock to avoid the return fire. The enemy formation dissolved into chaos. Without their commander, the fighters did not know whether to continue the attack or withdraw. Some began firing wildly in all directions, their bullets striking their own positions as often as the Americans. Others simply fled into the darkness, their morale shattered by the sudden turn of events. Maya used the confusion to make her way back to the alcove. Henderson was still holding his position, his carbine ready, though his face showed the strain of waiting alone in the darkness. "Did you get him?" Henderson asked as Maya dropped into cover beside him. "Got him," she confirmed, breathing heavily from the exertion. "They're falling apart out there." The firefight continued for another hour, but the intensity had diminished significantly. Without central leadership, the enemy attacks became sporadic and uncoordinated. Maya conserved her remaining ammunition. firing only when absolutely necessary to drive back the most determined fighters. By 3 in the morning, the shooting had stopped completely. Maya listened intently to the silence, waiting for any sign that the enemy was preparing another assault. But the only sounds were the wind and the distant howl of a mountain wolf. "I think they're gone," Henderson said, his voice weak from blood loss and exhaustion. Maya was not convinced. She had seen enemies retreat before, only to return with overwhelming force at dawn. They needed to move before the sun came up and exposed their position. "Can you walk?" she asked, kneeling beside Henderson to check his wound. He tried to stand, but his injured leg buckled beneath him. The tourniquet had stopped the bleeding, but the damage was severe. Without medical attention, he risked losing the leg entirely. "I can try," Henderson said through gritted teeth. "Help me up." Maya pulled him to his feet, draping his arm over her shoulders to support his weight. Together, they began the long, painful journey toward the canyon that might lead to safety. The terrain was brutal. Every step sent waves of agony through Henderson's body, and Maya felt her own strength fading with each passing hour. They stumbled through the darkness, guided only by the stars and Maya's memory of the terrain they had covered on the way in. Several times they heard enemy fighters searching the surrounding hills. Maya would pull Henderson into cover, her hand clamped over his mouth to stifle any sound of pain. They would wait in terrified silence until the searchers passed, then continue their desperate journey. Dawn found them at the entrance to the canyon, a narrow passage between towering rock walls that offered concealment from aerial observation. Maya paused to assess their situation. They were still at least 8 miles from the nearest friendly position, and Henderson was growing weaker with each passing minute. "We need to rest," she decided, guiding Henderson to a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock. "Just for a few hours." Henderson collapsed against the rock wall, his face pale and sweaty. "I'm slowing you down. You should go for help. Come back for me." Maya shook her head firmly. "We've been over this. I'm not leaving you." She pulled out her first aid kit and began redressing Henderson's wound. The bullet had passed through the muscle of his thigh, leaving entry and exit wounds that needed to be cleaned and bandaged. Maya worked quickly, trying to ignore Henderson's gasps of pain as she disinfected the injuries. "Where did you learn to do all this?" Henderson asked when she had finished. Maya sat back against the rock, allowing herself a moment of rest. "My father was a corpsman in Vietnam. He taught me everything he knew about combat medicine." "He sounds like a good man." "He is. Stubborn as a mule, but good." Henderson smiled weakly. "Like father, like daughter." They rested for 3 hours, taking turns keeping watch while the other slept. Maya's dreams were filled with images of the night's battle, the faces of the men she had killed mixing with the faces of friends she had lost over the years. She woke with her heart pounding, her hand reaching for her rifle before she remembered where she was. The sun was high in the sky when they resumed their journey. The canyon offered some protection from the heat, but the temperature still climbed steadily as the day progressed. Maya rationed their remaining water, giving Henderson larger portions to compensate for the fluid he had lost through his wound. They had covered perhaps 3 miles when Maya heard the sound she had been dreading since the ambush began. Vehicles, multiple vehicles, approaching from the direction of the village. The enemy had found their trail and was coming to finish the job. "In here," Maya said, pulling Henderson toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. "Quickly!" They squeezed into the crevice just as the first vehicle came into view. It was a pickup truck, its bed crowded with armed fighters scanning the canyon for any sign of the Americans. 2 more trucks followed close behind, their occupants equally alert. Maya pressed herself against the rock, holding her breath as the convoy passed within meters of their hiding spot. She could see the faces of the fighters, young men with hard eyes and weathered skin. Some were barely older than Henderson, yet they had already dedicated their lives to violence and death. The convoy continued deeper into the canyon, following a trail that led away from the Americans' position. Maya waited until the sound of engines had faded completely before allowing herself to breathe again. "That was close," Henderson whispered. Too close, Maya thought. The enemy was searching in the wrong direction for now. But it was only a matter of time before they expanded their search. They needed to find help before that happened. She pulled out the radio and tried again to raise headquarters. Static filled the air, but then, miraculously, she heard a voice cutting through the noise. "Any station this net? This is Thunder 6. Say again your position, over." Maya's heart leaped. The canyon walls were channeling the radio signal, allowing her transmission to reach the base. "Thunder 6, this is Reaper 2-1, she replied, using her call sign. "We are approximately 5 miles southwest of objective area, canyon passage bearing 270. We have 1 wounded, require immediate extraction, over." The response took several seconds, each one feeling like an eternity. "Reaper 2-1, Thunder 6 copies all. Be advised, extraction assets are inbound your location. ETA 3 hours. Can you hold over?" 3 hours? Maya looked at Henderson, who was struggling to stay conscious. 3 hours might as well be 3 days if the enemy found them first. "Thunder 6, Reaper 2-1. We will hold. Be advised, enemy forces are actively searching this area. Extraction zone may be hot. Over." "Understood, Reaper 2-1. Help is on the way. Thunder 6 out." Maya allowed herself a moment of relief before reality came crashing back. 3 hours of hiding in a canyon with enemy fighters searching every corner of the surrounding terrain. The odds were not in their favor, but they had survived this long. They would find a way to survive a little longer. She helped Henderson to his feet, and they began moving again, heading toward a wider section of the canyon where a helicopter might be able to land. Every step was a struggle, every sound a potential threat. But Maya refused to give up. She had made a promise to bring Henderson home, and she intended to keep it. The enemy found them 2 hours later. Maya was scouting ahead when she spotted the first fighter emerging from a side passage. She dropped to the ground instantly, her rifle coming up to her shoulder. The fighter had not seen her yet. His attention focused on the trail ahead. More fighters appeared behind him, at least a dozen spreading out to search the canyon. They were moving methodically, checking every crevice and shadow. It was only a matter of time before they found Henderson's hiding spot. Maya made a split-second decision. She rose from her position and fired, dropping the lead fighter with a single shot. The others scattered for cover, shouting in alarm as they tried to locate the source of the attack. "Come and get me," Maya whispered, already moving to a new position. She was leading them away from Henderson, drawing their attention with carefully placed shots that killed one fighter after another. The enemy responded with overwhelming firepower, their bullets chipping the rock walls around her, but Maya stayed one step ahead, using every bit of tactical knowledge she had accumulated over her career. The chase led deeper into the canyon, away from the extraction zone, but also away from her wounded teammate. Maya knew she was risking her own life to protect Henderson, but she had accepted that risk the moment she refused to leave him behind. She was running low on ammunition when she heard the sound that changed everything. Helicopter rotors, distant but growing closer with each passing second. Help had arrived ahead of schedule. The enemy heard it too. Their fire slackened as they debated whether to continue the pursuit or withdraw before the American aircraft arrived. Maya used the distraction to slip away, circling back through a narrow passage toward Henderson's position. She found him exactly where she had left him, his pistol in his hand, ready to fight to the last breath. His eyes widened when he saw her emerge from the shadows. "The helicopters," he said. "I heard them." Maya nodded, pulling him to his feet one final time. "Let's go home." They emerged from the canyon just as 2 Black Hawk helicopters crested the ridge, their door gunners scanning for threats. Maya waved her arms frantically, and the lead helicopter banked toward their position. The enemy made one last attempt to stop them. Bullets cracked through the air as fighters emerged from the canyon entrance, firing desperately at the Americans and the hovering aircraft. The helicopter gunners responded with devastating effect, their minigun tearing into the enemy positions and driving them back into cover. The Black Hawk touched down in a cloud of dust, and Maya half-carried Henderson to the open door. Hands reached out to pull them aboard, and suddenly they were airborne, rising above the canyon and the enemy fighters and the nightmare that had consumed the past 24 hours. Maya collapsed against the helicopter's interior wall, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she had been fighting since the ambush began. Henderson was beside her, medics already working to stabilize his wound. He caught her eye and managed a weak smile. "You did it," he said. "You got us out." Maya closed her eyes, feeling the vibration of the helicopter carrying them toward safety. The mission had failed. Abdul Rashid was still alive, still planning attacks that would kill Americans. But 2 soldiers who should have died in those mountains were going home instead. Sometimes, that had to be enough. The military hospital at Bagram Air Base was quiet when Maya woke from her first real sleep in 3 days. Sunlight streamed through the window beside her bed, warm and peaceful, a stark contrast to the cold darkness of the mountains where she had nearly died. Her body ached in ways she had never experienced before. Bruises covered her arms and legs where rocks had struck her during the firefight. Her hands were bandaged, the skin torn from crawling across rough terrain while dragging Henderson to safety. Every muscle protested when she tried to sit up, but the pain was a reminder that she was alive. A nurse noticed her movement and hurried over with a cup of water. "Easy there, Sergeant. You've been through a lot. The doctors want you to rest." Maya accepted the water gratefully, draining the cup in 3 long swallows. "Henderson, the soldier who was with me, is he okay?" The nurse smiled reassuringly. "Corporal Henderson is doing fine. He's in surgery right now to repair the damage to his leg, but the doctors are optimistic. He should make a full recovery." Relief washed over Maya like a wave. She had carried that worry with her through every moment of their escape, terrified that Henderson would die despite everything she had done to save him. Knowing he would survive made the pain in her own body seem insignificant. "There are some people waiting to see you," the nurse continued. "Your commanding officer and a few others. Should I send them in?" Maya nodded, straightening herself in the bed as best she could. She knew that a debriefing would follow, hours of questions about what had happened in those mountains. The military needed to understand how the mission had failed and how 2 soldiers had managed to survive against overwhelming odds. Captain Rodriguez entered first, his face a mixture of relief and concern. Behind him came 2 men Maya did not recognize, their civilian clothes marking them as intelligence officers rather than regular military personnel. "Sergeant Collins," Captain Rodriguez said, pulling a chair to her bedside. "It's good to see you awake. You gave us quite a scare." "I gave myself quite a scare, sir," Maya replied with a weak smile. Rodriguez's expression grew serious. "I've read Henderson's preliminary report. What you did out there was extraordinary. The way you flanked the enemy position, eliminated their commander, and then led them away from your wounded teammate. It's the kind of thing they write textbooks about." Maya shook her head. "I just did what needed to be done. Henderson was counting on me." One of the intelligence officers stepped forward, introducing himself as Agent Morrison. "Sergeant Collins, we need to discuss the events of the past 48 hours in detail. Specifically, we need to understand how the enemy knew your position." The question had been gnawing at Maya since the first bullet struck the rock beside her head. Someone had betrayed them, had told the insurgents exactly where the American snipers would be waiting. That kind of intelligence could only come from inside the operation. "I don't know," Maya admitted. "We followed all protocols." No one except the command team knew our exact location. Morrison exchanged a glance with his colleague. We've been investigating a suspected leak in the intelligence network for several months. Your mission may have been compromised before you even left the base. The revelation was staggering. Maya thought about all the soldiers who had been killed or wounded in operations that seemed to fail for no reason. How many of them had been victims of this same leak? How many lives had been lost because someone was feeding information to the enemy? "Do you know who it is?" she asked. Morrison hesitated before answering. "We have suspicions, but nothing we can prove. That's why we need your help." Over the next several hours, Maya recounted every detail of the mission, from the briefing to the ambush, to the desperate escape through the mountains. The intelligence officers listened intently, asking questions about timing, positions, and any unusual observations she had made. Maya answered as thoroughly as she could, though much of the night remained a blur of gunfire and adrenaline. When the debriefing finally ended, Maya was exhausted. The officers thanked her for her cooperation and left, their expressions grave. Whatever investigation was underway, it was clearly far from finished. Captain Rodriguez remained behind after the others had gone. He sat in silence for a long moment, studying Maya with an expression she could not quite read. "You know," he finally said, "when I first heard you were requesting a combat assignment, I had my doubts. A lot of people did. We'd never had a female sniper in the task force before, and there were concerns about how you would perform under pressure." Maya met his eyes steadily. She had heard variations of this speech throughout her career. The backhanded compliments that suggested she was somehow exceptional for doing what her male colleagues did every day. But Rodriguez surprised her. "I was wrong to doubt you. What you did out there proves that the best soldiers aren't defined by gender or background. They're defined by courage, skill, and the willingness to sacrifice for their teammates. You exemplify all of those qualities." Maya felt a lump forming in her throat. After years of fighting for respect, of proving herself over and over again to men who refused to see past her gender, the simple acknowledgement meant more than any medal or commendation. "Thank you, sir," she managed. Rodriguez stood to leave, then paused at the door. "The general wants to see you when you're feeling up to it. I think you can expect some recognition for what you accomplished." The days that followed were a whirlwind of medical examinations, interviews, and official visits. Henderson's surgery was successful, and Maya spent hours at his bedside, talking about everything except the night that had brought them together. They developed a bond that went beyond the normal camaraderie between soldiers, the unique connection of two people who had faced death together and survived. A week after their rescue, Maya was summoned to the commanding general's office. She had expected some form of recognition, perhaps a medal or a commendation letter. What she had not expected was the mission briefing that awaited her. General Patterson was a stern-faced man in his 60s, with a reputation for demanding the best from every soldier under his command. He gestured for Maya to take a seat across from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant Collins, I've reviewed the reports from your recent operation. Your actions were nothing short of heroic." "I was just doing my job, sir," Maya replied. Patterson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your job was to eliminate a high-value target. You failed to complete that objective." The words stung, but Maya kept her composure. "Yes, sir. The ambush prevented me from taking the shot." "The ambush that was set up because someone betrayed your position," Patterson continued. "Agent Morrison tells me you've been cooperating with the investigation into the intelligence leak." Maya nodded. "Anything I can do to help, sir." Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "What if I told you there was something more you could do? Something that could not only identify the traitor, but also give you another chance at your original target?" Maya's heart began to beat faster. "I'm listening, sir." Over the next hour, Patterson outlined a plan that was audacious, dangerous, and potentially suicidal. The investigation had identified a likely suspect in the intelligence leak, a local contractor named Khalid, who worked as a translator for the command team. But they needed proof, something that would expose Khalid without alerting the larger network of insurgent sympathizers. The plan was to feed Khalid false information about another sniper mission, this time targeting Abdul Rashid at a different location. If Khalid was the traitor, he would pass the information to his handlers, and the insurgents would set up another ambush. But this time, the Americans would be ready. "We'll have 2 teams in position," Patterson explained. "One at the false location, prepared to spring the trap on any insurgents who show up. And one at the real location, where Rashid will actually be meeting with his contacts." Maya understood immediately. "You want me to take the real shot while the enemy is chasing shadows?" "Exactly. But there's a catch. The mission will only work if Khalid believes the false information is genuine. That means we can't tell anyone else the truth, not even your spotter. As far as the rest of the team knows, the false location is the real objective. It was an enormous risk. If anything went wrong, Maya would be alone with no backup, no extraction plan, and no one even knowing where she really was. But the chance to complete her original mission, to finally eliminate the man responsible for so many American deaths, was too important to pass up. "I'll do it," she said. Patterson allowed himself a rare smile. "I thought you might say that. The mission is scheduled for 3 nights from now. Get some rest, Sergeant. You're going to need it." The following days were a blur of preparation and deception. Maya went through the motions of planning the fake mission, attending briefings and studying maps of a location she would never actually visit. All the while, she memorized the details of her real objective: a remote compound where Rashid was scheduled to meet with weapons suppliers. Henderson noticed that something was different. He cornered Maya in the hospital corridor on the eve of the mission, his legs still wrapped in bandages, but his eyes sharp and suspicious. "What's going on?" he demanded. "You've been acting strange all week." Maya wanted to tell him the truth, but Patterson's orders had been explicit. No one could know. "Nothing's going on, just nervous about going back out there." Henderson clearly did not believe her, but he knew better than to push. "Whatever it is, be careful. You saved my life out there. I'd like the chance to return the favor someday." Maya put a hand on his shoulder. "You will. I promise." The night of the mission was cold and clear, the stars burning bright above the mountains. Maya departed alone from a different base than her supposed team, riding in the back of an unmarked vehicle driven by intelligence operatives. They dropped her 5 miles from the target, and she covered the remaining distance on foot. The compound was smaller than she had expected, just a handful of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements lazy and predictable. They were not expecting trouble, unaware that an American sniper was watching them from the darkness. Maya set up her position on a rocky outcropping that offered clear sight lines to the main building. The range was longer than her previous attempt, nearly 1,000 meters, but the conditions were almost perfect. Light wind, clear visibility, stable shooting platform. If Rashid showed himself, she would not miss. The hours passed slowly. Maya remained motionless, her body melding with the rocks until she was virtually invisible. Somewhere to the north, the fake mission was underway, the other team setting up at the false location while insurgents presumably moved to ambush them. If the plan was working, Khalid's betrayal would soon be exposed. Just before midnight, vehicles began arriving at the compound. Maya watched through her scope as armed men emerged, their weapons visible even in the dim light. Then came the man she had been waiting for, Abdul Rashid stepping out of an armored SUV and walking toward the main building. Maya's finger found the trigger. At this distance, She needed to account for bullet drop and wind drift, but she had made similar calculations hundreds of times before. The crosshairs settled on Rashid's chest, and the world seemed to fall away until there was nothing but the target and the trigger. She fired. The bullet traveled for just over a second before finding its mark. Rashid stumbled, his hand going to his chest, then collapsed in a heap on the ground. His bodyguard spun in confusion, searching for the source of the shot. But Maya was already moving, abandoning her position before they could organize a response. The trek back to the extraction point was long and tense. Maya expected pursuit at any moment, enemy fighters flooding the hills to hunt for the sniper who had killed their leader. But the night remained quiet, the only sounds the wind and the crunch of her boots on the rocky ground. She reached the extraction point just as dawn was breaking. A helicopter was waiting, its rotors already spinning in preparation for departure. Maya climbed aboard and collapsed into a seat, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The mission was complete. Abdul Rashid was dead. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Patterson had predicted. Khalid had indeed passed false information to his insurgent contacts, and the ambush at the fake location had been intercepted by waiting American forces. Dozens of fighters were killed or captured, dealing a significant blow to the insurgent network. Khalid himself was arrested the following day, confronted with evidence of his betrayal that left no room for denial. Under interrogation, he revealed the names of others in the intelligence network, leading to a wave of arrests that crippled enemy operations for months to come. Maya received the Silver Star for her actions, one of the highest military decorations for valor in combat. The ceremony was held at the base, with General Patterson personally pinning the medal to her uniform. Henderson was there, walking with a slight limp, but grinning with pride. "You did it," Henderson said afterward, pulling her into an embrace. "You got the bastard." Maya accepted his congratulations, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She was thinking about the men who had died in operations compromised by Khalid's betrayal. She was thinking about the families who would never see their sons and daughters again. One bullet had ended Abdul Rashid's life, but no amount of bullets could bring back those who had been lost. The following month, Maya returned to the United States for leave. Her father was waiting at the airport, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw her emerge from the terminal. He did not say much as they drove back to the ranch, but his pride was evident in every glance he gave her. That evening they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the Montana mountains. Maya thought about how different these mountains were from the ones in Afghanistan, how peaceful and welcoming compared to the rocky terrain where she had nearly lost her life. "I read about what you did over there," her father finally said. "The reports didn't have your name, but I knew it was you." Maya nodded slowly. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But you did it. When everything fell apart, you found a way to keep going. That's what matters." She thought about his words long after he had gone inside. Her father had always believed in her, even when others doubted. He had taught her to shoot, to be patient, to trust herself even when the odds seemed impossible. Everything she had accomplished could be traced back to those lessons on the ranch. 6 months later, Maya was back in Afghanistan, leading her own sniper team on operations across the country. Henderson had recovered fully and requested assignment to her unit, determined to serve alongside the woman who had saved his life. Together they trained a new generation of marksmen, passing on the skills and values that had kept them alive. The war continued, as wars always do. New enemies replaced the old. New battles demanded sacrifice and courage. But Maya faced each challenge with the same determination that had carried her through the mountains that terrible night. She had proven herself in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. She had shown that courage and skill knew no gender, that the bonds between soldiers transcended everything else. and she had learned that sometimes one bullet was all it took to change everything. The evening bullet that killed Abdul Rashid had done more than end a terrorist's life. It had validated years of struggle against prejudice and doubt. It had saved countless lives that would have been lost in future attacks. And it had transformed Maya Collins from a skilled sniper into a legend, a symbol of what was possible when talent and determination refused to be denied. Her story would be told for years to come, inspiring other women to pursue their own paths in the military. Some would become snipers like her. Others would find their calling in different roles. But all of them would know that the barriers they faced were not insurmountable, that courage and competence could overcome even the deepest prejudices. Maya did not think of herself as a hero. She thought of herself as a soldier who had done her job under difficult circumstances. But to the young women who heard her story, who saw what she had accomplished against all odds, she was something more. She was proof that anything was possible.